My name is Ann Rosen Kaiman. I was born October 1st, 1921 in Omaha, Nebraska. I believe I was born what they called the Ford Hospital. I don't remember where it's at naturally, but I think it was on Douglas Street, which became a hotel. My parents were Fanny Dunn Rosen. My father was Paul Rosen. My mother was called Thega. I questioned her about her maiden name, and she said it was Dunn, Dunn. What the family was originally, I don't know, but she had relatives in Philadelphia, and they spelled their name Don. My mother was from Poland, a little town which was on the border of Russia and Poland, sometimes Russia, sometimes Poland. My father, he came from Russia, I believe around the Minsk, Kapulia area. I know we had a reunion of relatives about 5 years ago, and 200 showed up. And it was the family of Kuppel. And my father came, well, they both came before World War I. My father had been married before, and he had 4 sons. He met my mother in Omaha. She came to Omaha because she had a sister, Rebecca Sweeback. My father came to Omaha because he had relatives, two sisters, Mima Basha and Mima Sura, and Uncle Joe. I had four aunts, Mima Basha Wintrobe, Mima Sura Garber, Tanta, which was Rebecca Sweeback, and Auntie Etta, who was married to Joe Rosen. Each had different names, but they all meant aunt. I grew up at our first address that I can remember. I was too young. My father had a grocery store on North Sprague Street. That was while I was a little child. Sally Banger keeps reminding me about those days, having long curls and my father and mother having the store. Then he had a grocery store on Leavenworth Street, but this was during, and he went bankrupt. Then my father became a peddler, a junk peddler. He bought and sold whatever he could buy. He went out in the country mostly and bought what you would call job lots. My mother stayed home and raised the 4 boys. The oldest was Ben, the oldest was Sid, and the youngest was Ben. There was Sydney, Sydney, Sam, Charlie, and Ben. They were never stepbrothers. We were all together. It was one happy family. I grew up originally at 2019 North 20th. That would be like Florence Boulevard. Then we moved to 2047 North 19th Street, which was predominantly a Jewish area. I could name all the Jewish people that lived up and down the street, from approximately Lake School to about Clark, or one of the streets I can't remember.
I want you to name them.
The streets.
Any of the kids you can name, the people.
Oh, what I went to school with? Well, let's see. Across from us, we called that the Castle when I lived on 20th Street. Mr. Steinberg lived next door. That was Doc Steinberg, the eye doctor's father. He drove a horse and wagon, and his wife would never let him in the house. He had to go down the basement. In those days, the basement is like going down the stairs, and he had to change clothes. I think his name was Isaac. I can't remember. Was it Isaac? But if you ever read the story of Danny Kravitz, and the father says, "Oh, there goes Faradol," and that's what Mr. Steinberg called his horse. I think the horse even wore a hat in the summertime. And my dad, I remember he bought old cars, and my playhouse was a beautiful electric car with the silver things. What do you call? I can't think. The silver vases on either side, and that was my playhouse. Then else did we live with? Well, Mr. Steinberg. Oh, what was their name? It was Elaine Lagman's grandparents. I can't think. It wasn't Lagman, but they lived on the other side of us, and I played with two Italian girls. I remember that. And my closest friends were the Muir girls, Muir. They were strictly Swedish. And if you remember the story, I remember Mama. That was their house. Their mother baked and cooked. Of course, my mother did too. She kept kosher. She went to 24th Street, to the butcher shops, the fish places. We went to, was Crounce's the one that had the fish swimming? And you went to get the chickens, and they plucked the chickens. And God forbid if you had a chicken or a fish that you were in question, you took it back to 24th Street and complained. And I grew up there with the fish in the bathtub. And there's that beautiful story, A Fish in the Bathtub, that I've read to all of my three boys. And I says it's true, because before the holidays, there was that damn carp swimming in the bathtub. Then we moved to North 19th Street. There was, from one end, there was the Zolitutions. I'm going down, Zolitutions. Who else? There was the Levines. There was next to us was, oh God, her husband was a dentist, and she was Abramsons, the Abramsons. Then next door to us was the Wintrobes, the Foxes, Aunt Fox. Then was Wolfsons. Then next door to them was, it was Daddy, from the grocery, his son is a real estate now. Danny, the Cones. Then the Hans. Then the Bergs. And then across the street was, I can't remember, but there was the Cone family. And that was the attorney's father. And he always walked with his head down reading a paper. Then next to them, I can't remember, but we called that the Castle. That's where the Rothkopfs lived. Oh, also the Gusses lived on that side of the street. Then going back the next block, I can't remember that so much. But it was all, then if you went past Grace Street, from Grace you went to Clark, or from Clark you went to Grace. Gosh, there were the Silvermans. Oh, my memory, the Foxes, that was Freemet and Manny Fox. Oh, my. Oh, and we went to the corner grocery store on 20th Street. Brodsky, I remember that, the Brodsky Grocery. Oh, and Johnson. She had a little grocery store on 20th Street that I used to go to. My mother would send me. And she had penny candy, and if there was a penny left over, I got to choose it. That was Lil Ban and Mary Johnson's mother. And it was then you went down. I had friends that went down. The Blackers lived, that was right off of 24th Street, about 23rd. But there was all those Jewish people that lived down to 24th Street that you went down on. I can't remember the streets anymore. My memory's escaping me. But it was wonderful. It was just a real happy Jewish neighborhood. I remember, next door to us, when they moved out, a Gentile couple moved, and they had a boy, and we would swing on my front porch, and my mother would say, "It's 7 o'clock, you have to come in." Because you didn't go with anybody that wasn't Jewish. You went to school with kids of all different nationalities. I went to Lake School. Lake is no longer there. Lake was on 20th and, what's 20th and Lake, yeah. Across the street was Green's Grocery. Okay, there was two Greens, that's right. And Lake is no longer there. And I think we only had one or two black kids in the school at that time until I graduated. There were not too many black kids. There were further down if you went down Lake Street toward 24th Street. Oh, I used to go to the Corby Theater, went every Saturday afternoon, and then you would go down. That was daring to go down to the Ritz Theater on 24th Street. And predominantly at that time, it was mostly white people that went there, even though there were blacks. But and then, we went to visit my Mimasura. She lived on 20, no, she lived across from Sura and the Bud. That was Sarah and the mikveh. And across from her was the little shul, the Kapulia shul. We went to the Rishish shul. That was the forerunner of B'nai Israel. Yeah. And on the holidays, you got all dressed up, especially for the high holidays. And you went visiting from synagogue to synagogue, from 18th in Chicago to the Litvish Shul on 19th and Burt. And sometimes you went to the Kapuya. That was quite a ways to walk. But it would be back and forth from the Litvisha to the Rishisha. And the reason it was called that is because most of the people that went to the Rishisha Shul were more or less Russians. The Litvisha was the Lithuanians and the Hungarians or whatever. And there was rivalry between the two. After graduating Lake School, I went to Central High. My father rode a truck. I would take the bus to go to Central High. But in the mornings, he would take me in the truck. And I would be ashamed. So he would drop me off 2 blocks before Central, only in the morning. And then my brothers, Sid went to New York and got married. Sam, he married a woman from New York City. My brother Sam married Sylvia Fisher. Oh, the Fishers lived on 20th Street, next to the Maryman Mission. And next to them was, he taught Hebrew school, but he was the bad one. Wolfson, he would hit you at Hayter. My mother also sent me to Hayter, which was on Burt Street, about 21st and Burt. That was the only place where you learned Hebrew, more or less. I resented it, so I wouldn't go. So my mother hired Mr. He was from Council Bluffs, a teacher to come. When he came, I didn't show up. Well, in those days, it cost $0.25, and $0.25 was a lot of money. So I never learned Hebrew, to my regret. My mother tried. I went to Sunday school at the Jewish Community Center, which was the forerunner of Bethel. I was confirmed there and even went to post-confirmation. Rabbi Goldstein was our rabbi. We had wonderful teachers. I can't remember his name. He became an executive with B'nai B'rith. Oh. And we all congregated at the Jewish Community Center, which was on 20th Street. That was the social life of everyone. You went with your parents to a dance there, to a happening, and after high school, you went to Central High to see what was what. From there, you walked down to Metropolitan Drug to have a Coke, a cherry Coke in those days. And on Sundays in the summertime, everybody, well, my mother's friends and family, we all went on a picnic to Elmwood Park, and everybody brought something. I know there was one group that my mother, she was not a card player, nor my father, and they would sort of look down at the people that were playing poker there. But it was, everybody brought their bundles and kids, and you went down to get the water. And in the summertime, before air conditioning, we slept on the screen porch in front and have a several you got ice for your ice box. They didn't have refrigeration. And you would take a block of ice and put it in front of the screen door, and everybody slept in the screen porch. Then if you were brave, you went to the top of Central High School, and my cousin, Evelyn Sweeback Feldman, I still have a scar, taught me the facts of life. Spending the night at Elmwood at Central High Lawn, because that was up high. Where I lived also, you smelt South Omaha. You smelt the odor of when they were slaughtering the cows. A big treat in the summer was going to Irvington, Nebraska for ice cream and buttermilk. And we drove past the 10-mile inn that was on Dodge Street. And that was really going out in the country. My cousins Abe and Pearl Rosen lived in Papillion, Nebraska. They had a general store on top of the they had a general store, and on top they lived on one side, and the telephone company was on the other. Aunt Etta and Uncle Joe Rosen also lived in Papillion, Nebraska. They had a grocery store, and that was a big treat for me to go to Papillion. That was a day's trip. It was a real country road, and we went there. And going there for a couple days was my vacation in Papillion to visit my cousin Dorothy Rosen Lincoln. We both got deathly sick because we went to a friend's house and she gave us sandwiches. We thought it was bread and butter, but it was bread and lard. Also, what did I do after school? I always walked to the library. It was quite a walk, but it kept me trim. The library was on 19th and Harney, and I would walk back and forth. I loved to read. And on Sundays when I went to Sunday school, I always came to my tanta's house. That was Mrs. Sweeback, because she lived on 21st and Webster. And my cousins, that was Evelyn Feldman, Ann Grossman, and Min Frank. And they were like my sisters. And my tante always had, every Sunday, veal chops for her boys, because she was afraid her daughter-in-laws weren't feeding them. So she had veal chops and mashed potatoes. And it was a big round table in the kitchen. And she had a coal stove. And the table, there was like a vase, but it was a bowl with the silverware, the gooples and the knives. And you helped yourselves. But her veal chops were delicious. She always gave me a nickel. And I was given a nickel charity money. But sometimes I didn't give that nickel to charity, because with my tante giving me the nickel, I had a dime to walk to the movie theaters downtown, and then I would walk home. So I had 10 cents to go to the movies. When I was going to high school, I was given an allowance of $1.50. That took care of whatever incidentals that I needed, like going to the shows, buying stuff, and I treated myself twice a week to lunch. I think lunch was 10 cents. I had hot roast beef sandwiches with gravy, Goyish gravy, because that was the brown gravy. We only had au juice at our house. And Spanish hamburger, that was hamburger with meat. To me, those were two treats. Growing up, everything was at the community center. I went to dances with my mother and father. Everybody went with their parents. It was just a wonderful feeling. Even though you didn't know the kids from South Omaha, you knew of them. And I only associated outside of school with Jewish kids. It was a wonderful time to grow up. The demands were not great. We didn't know of material things. We were all poor, but we didn't realize it. Our family got together always every Sunday at our house. We were probably the poorest. This is my dad's side of the family. My mother was an excellent cook. I woke up every Friday to the smell of herring being pickled, gefilte, the fish being cooked, and the kichel and the bread being baked. That was every Friday. Uncle Joe loved the kichel, so my mother had to make that's like rolls. My mother always had to save a pan for him. But every Sunday, my aunts and my uncle would come over, and whatever was in the house, we ate. It was a milchika dinner, more or less. A milchika, that's a dairy dinner. Shabbos was always with the beautiful white cloth and the challahs, and you started with an appetizer. You had your soup, you had your chicken, you had a vegetable, a potato, and a dessert, and always wine on the table. My mother and father were not drinkers. My dad, when he came home from work, always had a small shot of whiskey and then changed his clothes and showered to come down to dinner. Wine was served only at Shabbos and at holidays. There was always enough. My mother could make a pound of hamburger grow. Whether it was for 5 people, we called them kaletten in those days, which is a super hamburger. It was fun going down to North 24th Street for the shopping, the bustle and the hustle, and everybody greeting each other. And did I say the fish, and the chickens? And I remember everybody was scared when Canner Schwartzens, I think if I'm saying it pronounced, he was the canner of the Rosh Hashanah. His wife was found murdered by a black handyman called Willie. My mother used Willie, the Abramsons used Willie, the Greens used Willie, the Foxes, but after that, poor Willie didn't have a chance. We had coal in those days. You delivered a ton of coal, yes. I think it was anthrax because that burned cleaner. You did your laundry downstairs. My mother did it on a washboard, and then you hung it up on the lines in the wintertime in the cellar. In the summertime, you hung it out on the lines. And many a time you brought in clothes that were frozen stiff, and then you would hang them up all over. Growing up, none of us had cars, so when I did date, which I didn't do too much, because my father believed that studies came first before social. So I would cry and say, "You're hindering me." And if you did have a date, it was a protective. We went either to an AZA affair or the UT or the KT or the Rono. Those were private clubs at Central High School, and they always had a formal dance. And otherwise, there were dances at the community center, and you went there. And I was active. I was a young Judea girl. Then I was a young Judea was a pre-runner of Junior Hadassah. And then from Hadassah, when you got married, you went to Senior Hadassah. But those were my activities. Oh, there was the youth council. It was just a wonderful, happy time. We didn't know of riches. We didn't know of television. Oh, when radio first came out, we went to my tante's because they had a crystal set. And we sat around and we listened to that crystal set because my cousins, Joe Sweeback and Sam Sweeback and Ichi, were pretty good about putting things together. And then they got we had a Victrola. Yes, we did have a Victrola. And my dad loved to listen to the songs, the hymns of the canners. yes, Rosenblatt, but my cousins, the Sweebacks, had the first real forerunner of television, and they were one of the first. Well, everybody congregated there on Saturdays. On Saturdays, my parents would go to the synagogue and then come home for lunch. And then, as a treat, my mother would take me on the streetcar. This was at least after she was very religious, to go to Brandeis. We went to the tea room where I got a chocolate soda, and then we went to my tante's house where we had tea and cookies. And it was not a hectic, but you kept busy all the time. Ah, it brings back wonderful memories. I'm glad I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. I got married to Irv Kaiman. His nickname was Finnegan. And I had seen him when I used to go every Monday to either the Young Judea or the Junior Hadassahs. And he would be in the hall with his guitar. He played in the so-called Jewish Symphony. I think they played the Persian dance song for years. And then I had gone to a wedding, Mort Fisher and Shirley Goldberg's. And I was supposed to meet somebody from Sioux City. And I missed him, and I saw Irv, and I said, do you know if they were here? Anyways, he called me for a date, and we got started. And in fact, I went out on a dare, because one of my best friends, who became my sister-in-law, was Rose Paperny. And she was going with Bernie, they called him Truck in those days, Trachtenberg. Trachtenberg. And she dared me to go out with Finnegan. And I said, oh, I'm not his type. But I accepted the dare, and that's how I went out. What did we do? Oh, we were all poor when we first got married. What did we do? Oh, when we dated, we used to go on Reedy Roast with the AZA boys. You know, that was most of the activity was around all the AZA. And we, in those days, if you had someone over, it was for crackers and cheese and coffee. Nobody had cocktail parties or canopies or hors d'oeuvres or drinks. It was, come on over for cracker and cheese or Coke and coffee. And gradually, as we lived, when we got married, it was the war years. So Irv was not accepted. He was 4F. So we lived with my mother. I went to work for the government. He went to work for the Martin plant, which made the B-29s. He felt he had to do something for the war effort. My mother was working also. We lived on North 38th Street, 130. My father died a week after I graduated high school. He and my mother had gone to Excelsior Springs. Unfortunately, he had a stroke and pneumonia, and that's where he passed away. So therefore, my plans to going to college was sort of, so I went to OU. That was they had moved, and they were on Dodge Street, and I used to take the streetcar going. OU became UNO. And I went there for 2 years, and I thought I was going to an overgrown high school. It wasn't the same. Then my first job was with Roy Feltman at Capital Liquors. I made $15 a week. Also, while I was going to OU, I worked a couple Saturdays during Christmas at Central Market for $2 a day, from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 at night. And I worked in the first department, which is fruit and vegetables. And they had these beautiful stuffed dates rolled in coconut. And I would grab one every now and then. And Mr. Kulikowski would come by and he'd say, "You're eating the profits." Then I had another job at Jordan's. It was a department store above Goldstein Chapman's. And it was strictly credit. because you could put 10 cents down, 10 cents a week. And I worked there for $2 a day. And then I went to work for Capital Liquors, and I made $15 a week. Then I took a civil service, and I went to work for the U.S. Corps of Engineers at 18th and St. Mary's. And what did I make? I made 12. I started 1260 per year, and Mary Feldman was working there, and Bess Gould, and several others. And we would go to lunch. I would allow myself 15 cents. We went to either Brandeis Pompane Room, which I could get a dish of cottage cheese and a cup of coffee and a roll, all for 15 cents. Otherwise, we went to Northrop Jones, and that was a treat. You could get a deviled egg sandwich. I think that was 10 cents, and a cup of coffee for a nickel. And it was like going in the streetcar. The streetcar, you had to drop your coins into a slot, and that's the way it was at Northrop Jones. So 15 cents was allowed for my lunch. Where did we just, when we were dating, we went to Peony Park in the Royal Grove to dance in the summertime. In the wintertime, you either went to the Music Box. You didn't go to the Shermont, not unless it was a private affair, because that had the reputation. The Jewish boys would go there on Thursday night to pick up the shiksas. I know that's derogatory, but those were sort of the housemates. So they didn't take you to the Shermont just in case, but they took you to the Music Box, which was around the Jewish Community Center. We used to go to Jack and Jill, where you'd order a cheese sandwich and a Coke. Oh, the hangout was naturally the Blackstone Hotel, in a coffee shop. That was when we were married. We used to hang out we'd go to dances with the guys from Council Bluffs. Irv's best friend was Gene Teltner, who we called Cupie. And we would go to Nalabo's, and you could dance to the Music Box and order a beer and sit there the whole evening for 10 cents. Then we used to go to the Dundee Dell. That was next to the Dundee Theater. The Coen brothers owned that. Another place you would go after the dance was to the Castle Hotel for pancakes. You went to the Jack and Jill. Who was next door? That was the Rome? I can't remember. And then you went to Dixon's. And most of the Jewish kids went to the usual places. So you all hung out, even when you were dating. Afterwards, you went for a Coke or a sandwich or whatever, or you went to Peony or to the Music Box. Music Box was predominantly either Saturday or Sunday night. When you were single, if you were dating, but you didn't do much during the middle of the week. Guys were working. And then when we got married, we lived with my mother. Then we moved to Corning, Iowa. We went into business with my brother. We bought a Kaiman's grocery store. We lived on top of the grocery store. Unfortunately, they didn't have a good reputation, so they didn't consider the Jews very nice. My brother joined the Knights of Pythias, and he joined this. I was active, so they accepted us. We were known as the Jew store. There was 3 grocery stores. We were the Jew store. I had a child, my oldest one, so we decided to move back to Omaha. My brother kept the store. We moved back to Omaha, and we bought our first house on 47th and Cass. And we paid the huge amount of $7,200. It was a bungalow. I mean a bungalow. walked in, living room, dining room was separated by bookcases, a kitchen which you could turn around, two bedrooms, small bedrooms, and a bath. I had three children there. Then we moved to 115 South 54th, and that's where my husband died in 1971. My kids went to nursery school at Bethel. They went to nursery school at Jocelyn, but they all went to nursery school at Bethel. We belonged to Bethel. That's where they had their bar mitzvahs. Uh, the house on 54th Street also, we had Jewish people. Next door lived Selwyn Rothman and his wife. Then there was Doc and Ann Reutzstein, and across from them was Ernie and Ernie Nog and Adlin. The Falkensteins lived on that block. Who else? Around the corner, Bernice and Alan Wolfson lived there. That was also the Ill Dundee neighborhood, was predominantly Jewish also, because you would go to the synagogue and you would walk home. How far were we from Bethel? And everybody was walking or going. You didn't have to take your car. The kids went to Dundee School. They hang out also with Jewish kids predominantly. Their activities were from the Jewish Community Center, itty bitty basketball, regular basketball, AZA. Everything revolved, them growing up with Jewish. They had naturally Gentile friends too, but predominantly they all went with Jewish boys and girls. And they, as far as I know, they dated mostly Jewish girls, but I wouldn't vouch for that. None of them are here. One's in California. Frank is in New York. He's an attorney. Barry is an attorney in California. Paul was an actuary, and he's not married. And he started Homer's with Bruce Hoberman, even though he was an actuary at Mutual. And then he had some medical problems, and he left. And he's in North Dakota, Grand Fork. And I have four grandchildren. Barry has two, a boy and a girl. Sarah is my granddaughter, the only girl that I didn't have. Frank and Laura, they both married. Barry married a non-Jew, and she converted. In fact, she converted before they were married in New York. She went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, so she had to go through the mikveh and the whole works. Frank married Laura. Barry met his wife, Tony. They were both students at Nebraska Law, and they are both attorneys. Tony does not practice. She practiced for a few years. She was with the government. And when she had Sarah, she quit. She's been a stay-at-home mom. Frank went to school at, Barry went undergraduate. He went to Rutgers and then to Nebraska Law. Paul went to the University of Illinois, graduated actuarial science. Frank went to Colgate undergraduate and then went to NYU, and he stayed in New York as an attorney. He met his wife, I think, at one of the resorts. They have two boys. They are both adopted. Laura is a working mother. She works something with computers. What she does, I don't know, but she has a big job with computers. She started with IBM, and then she left them. She works for a financial company, but nothing to do with stocks and bonds, strictly computers. Frank is an attorney in New York City. He's the attorney for property management, which is real estate. Barry is, what is he? Intellectual law, I don't know, but he was the general partner there, but he had an illness, so he gave it up, but he travels quite a bit, and he has a lot of perks. Frank is more inside, so he doesn't. we get together, and they are still active in the synagogue, in their respective synagogues. They are raising their children Jewish, and they say that they were thrilled that they were brought up in Omaha, Nebraska. My mother kept a very kosher house, so she always had to go down to 24th Street. That was the shopping area of the Jewish people. The big department store was Kraunz's big department store. No, was it Kraunz's? No, it wasn't Kraunz's. Oh, Levinson. No, yeah, what was the name of that? I can't think of it, but that was the big department store run by Jews. But you had to go, especially before the holidays and the Sabbath, because you had to pick out the chicken. You had to pick out your chicken for the holidays and for Shabbos, and they actually flicked it in front of you so that you be sure that they got all of it. And you wrapped it warm to take home. And then you went to Kraunz's for the fish, and they would pick out, my mother would point which fish she wanted, and also was wrapped. And then you went to the then you have to make another trip because they were warm. You had to take the chicken home and the fish, and if you'd actually either bought it on Wednesday or Thursday to get it ready, excuse me. So again, the fish was in the bathtub. The chicken, you had an ice box with ice. Oh, the ice was underneath. Then you went back to pick out the challahs. There was Forbes, there was Adler's. Fuff's was not down there. I think they were on, I can't remember, but Fuff's finally moved to 24th off of Farnham or someplace there. And you had to get the bagels. My mother didn't buy much bread. She made her own challahs, that's right. So she bought rye bread, during the week. But challahs she made herself. It was wonderful. Oh, and you went to Adler's. And Mr. Old Man Adler, he was there with his schmatadicka apron, smelling garlic. And Jake was there, and Maury was there, but the Old Man Adler was there, and he had the barrels with the pickles. Oh, and you went to Schukert's for meat, and you went to Diamonds for meat. If you didn't like Diamonds one day, you went to Schukert's, and if you got mad at Schukert's, you went to Diamonds, or you went to your place. What was the other butcher?
Glass.
Glass, right. So you went to Glass. It was so Hamish there. My mother then would come home. My dad also went, my mother would go to, and I didn't know where it was or why, but she would park me over at my cousin, my Imasura, because she lived by the Boot. And my mother somehow managed to go there. Why or what, it was never explained to me. But I played with my cousin Margie. And, and they were, my Mimasura, her husband was active with the little Kapuya shul. And that's where all the Kirschenbaums went, and some of the Wintrobes went there. But also, as I said, we did go to the Ritz Theater, which was on North 24th. It was mostly Jewish people. There were some blacks already, but not too many. You felt very safe going down there. Greens had a grocery store, I remember, across from Lake School. And that's where I would go also. There was going down on Lake Street, if you're going down 24th. Oh, I remember. I think there was a black nightclub there or something. Yes, because across the street from us, when I lived on North 19th, next to the Cones where the Rothkopfs, they had moved out, was this big house, and I don't know who the owner was at the time, but she was the first black lady on the block. And my mother welcomed her, and she wasn't very sociable. But this was the period. She ran a house, we're going to say, of ill repute. Because we'd say, great big Lincoln Cadillacs coming there. This was where the black entertainers stayed. They couldn't stay at hotels, it was restricted, so they went to Mamie's house. My brother Sam owned a wholesale retail grocery, but it was mostly wholesale. He owned it with Fred Ellicott, Omaha Market. And my mother would complain to Mamie that she didn't like what was going on. Mr. Cone, Harry Cone's father, complained also. But she came over to my mother and said, Mrs. Rosen, I buy my meats from your son and groceries, so I shouldn't be that bad. But that's where the big black entertainers stayed, was at her house. We'll call it a hotel. My dad, as I said, was a peddler. He was mostly out in the country. However, he did business with Aaron Fair and, Eileen Eisenstadt's father. Feder, I think, can't remember, but mostly with Aaron Fair. And it was fun going down to North 24th Street. As I said, my Missouri lived on 25th Seward, well, by the little shoal. So we were there a lot in that area. They came to visit us. It was just wonderful seeing all the it was strictly Jewish. Everybody had to go there for their especially if they kept kosher. That was the only place to buy kosher foods. If you didn't keep kosher, but everybody I knew kept kosher, so it was a social thing. I remember going in buying the diamonds, and I asked once the price for the hamburger was per pound, and what's his name said, "Your mother doesn't ask prices, and you don't ask prices." You didn't dare ask how much it was. Meyer was the nicest one of the Diamond Boys. I wasn't around much in the store, but and Forbes, well, they were young, so they weren't in there. Then Forbes did move their bakery up to Underwood, but it was a different feeling going there. I guess it would be the same thing as today, Hispanics staying in South Omaha and going to their grocery store and their restaurant where they knew everyone. But that was the feeling then, growing up in the 1920s, going to on North 24th Street. What was the name of the department store?
Was it Star?
Star. The Star store. Levinson's owned that. Yes, yes. I don't remember doing much shopping in there, but that was a big department store. Later on, a lot of the blacks went there. It was just wonderful. My kids didn't have the same. My boys did not have the same feeling that I did growing up of North 24th Street. They knew of Diamonds, they knew of Forbes Bakery. When they were growing up, there was only one meat market. Schukert's was there. Yeah, I did mention Schukert's. Schukert's had moved out. Diamonds was, where were they? Oh, then the brothers came in, over there by Saddle Creek. Yeah, I went there. The Diamonds closed up shop, I think. And so they didn't have the same feeling that I did of growing up very Jewish. I mean, it was really, you could almost say it wasn't a ghetto, but I guess you could compare it to a ghetto. We were not restricted, but we went there. Uh,
Tell me about your mother.
okay, my mother was short and dumpy. She was beautiful, I thought. She was a marvelous cook and a marvelous bake. She was known for her baking. Everybody had to come to Auntie Fanny's for her strudel and her honey cakes. And as I said, she was very orthodox. You didn't dare mix. I was the Shabbos goy, unfortunately, because she wouldn't light the stove on Shabbos. Once it was gone now, unless I did it or somebody. She kept a very Jewish meal. She was very, I said, from what I was told, I spoke mostly Yiddish until I went to school because, well, my mother talked to me in English. No, she would try to talk to me in English, and she would answer me in Yiddish because she wanted to know English. She did go to night school. She loved to bake and cook. She was strictly a homemaker. She didn't play cards like the other lady. She did go on Sundays with my cousin Heike Sorf. I guess you would call her Ida, but we called each other by their Yiddish names, the older ones. It was, Mima Sora, Mima Basha, Heike. They played casino, I remember. She visited them. She visited the relatives. She said her prayers in the morning. Every morning, she had to read her prayers. I remember reciting, I can't remember, but I had to say the morning, my Hebrew is very bad. On Shabbos, if she didn't go to the synagogue, which was hard, she would go through the whole service, and then she wasn't that way, but she would talk on the phone. But nothing was to interrupt her morning service. They fasted. She was just a typical Jewish mother. Loved to bake and cook, clean. She sewed, not too much though. As I said, she raised 4 boys, so she did all those shirts ironing. Oh, we did have the laundry, yes. I remember Kimball's came, or Puritan. Puritan was the one that we called her Aunt Jemima. She washed on the washboard. You had wet wash in those days. Yes, you sent out for wet wash. She loved to bake, and she was known for her baking. All the cousins, when they wanted something special, they would say, Tante, you got to make this for us. Tante, you got to make that for us. She loved visiting with the neighbors. When we lived on, one of her best friends was Mrs. Fingret. Jenny was her, but we always called their parents or whoever, never by their first name. It was Mrs. Fingret, Mrs. this, Mrs. that. And they were the best of friends, and they would get mad with each other. My cookies are better than your cookies. Boom. If they had a bad day with me or Mrs. Fingret with her daughter Rosella Sivan, what's on my heart is cloudy. With mine hearts, if it was like a cloudy day, bang would go the receiver. 10 minutes later, they would call, but they never apologized to each other. Your cookies are fat, mine are better. She loved going to the Hadassah meetings. She was active in the Mizrahi and the Bikur Hoilim. Nothing could interfere with her meetings. She enjoyed them. When I had my first child, she would babysit, but only if she didn't go to her meetings, and I had to bring my son down to her house. She was not a babysitter, and it had to be at her convenience, which was always okay. But she loved going to Bikur Cholim, Mizrahi, and the Hadassah meetings. She loved going to the synagogue. Of course, there was no sisterhoods in those days or anything. And when I was growing up, on Yom Kippur, if you were under 8, they used to make a sandwich lunch, and you would go down in the basement at the Rosh Hashanah, and you would eat your lunch there. But as you got older, oh no, 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 no. My dad, he was active in the synagogue. He wasn't quite as religious as my mother, but he went along with it. On Shabbos, my dad would go to the synagogue. My mother wouldn't ride in the morning. So she said my dad would ride to the synagogue, and then they would come home. Oh, and especially in the winter, they would make pacha, which is cold pacha and hot pacha. I think cold pacha was for lunch because you didn't have to heat it. And that was the cow's foot. And it was delicious. Today you couldn't pay me to eat it. But it was delicious. Oh, growing up, we fought for the legs in the chicken soup. That was a treat. And the little yellow egg in the soup. And the youngest one got the little egg, so that was me because I was the youngest of 4 brothers. I was spoiled, having 4 older brothers. All I had to do was cry or whine. I guess I was just a spoiled brat, but I didn't think so. I was given every indulgence, being the only girl. I whatever clothes I wanted, I had to say, Papa. And my dad would go shopping with me for clothes, not my mother so much, because I could inveigle my dad to spend more and get more, whereas my mother would say no. I guess you would call my mother a real balabusta. That means somebody that was a good housekeeper, a good cook, a good person. My brothers spoiled me. My dad spoiled me. We were poor, but I didn't know we were poor. We never went without food or clothes in those days. And we reminisce with my friends today. And none of us ever considered that we were poor or undernourished or hungry or nothing. We were all in the same boat. My mother was an excellent cook. You could almost tell practically the whole week what the menu was. We'll start with Shabbos. Again, it was the traditional Shabbos. She made the challahs, the whole course. Saturday lunch, you had the leftovers. She didn't. If it was if the pilot was on, then you put before you went to services, the synagogue, you would put the pot of soup or whatever on top of the pilot light. That was for a gas furnace. I mean a gas stove. Then at night you had milchiks, which was dairy food, because after all you had chicken and all that. Sundays, again, all the relatives came over. So my mother always made herring. She made the pickled herring. We had pickled herring and schmaltz herring for Sunday night dinner. I used to go to my tante's for lunch where she had the veal chops. For lunch, I suppose it was the deli food, corned beef, salami, the usual. But for Sunday night, there was pickled herring, schmaltz herring, salmon salad, vegetables, kartoffels. That was the potatoes in what? But that wasn't baked potatoes. It was kartoffels. Oh, I can see them in front of me, kartoffels. That's what they called it. And then Monday night, we usually had hamburger. And we called them coqueletten. And there would be, mashed potatoes or baked potato, a salad. We always had to have an appetizer. Appetizers would be, like on Friday, would be chopped liver. Uh, During the week would be a white radish with onion and schmaltz. God, yes. And then there would be, what else other app? Oh, that was a favorite. On pumpernickel bread, and you put the schmaltz on the pumpernickel bread, and then if you were daring, you put a garlic and you rub that on top. On Tuesdays, that was a milchika dinner. That would be salmon salad, maybe fish, but usually a salmon salad. Wednesdays would be a pot roast with the au juice gravy. We never had, again, with a kugel. We called it kegel. A Luxian kegel. It could be a rice kegel. Her rice kegels. It was more the sweet kind. Some would say that's because you came from Poland. Pilisha, not British, because it had raisins and apples. Thursday night was milchiks. That was dairy because you had meat the day before and you're going to have over Shabbos. So you could just about tell it was meat, it was dairy, it was meat, it was dairy, meat.
Did everyone sit down at the same time for dinner?
At our house, most of them did. Most of us, yes, we did. My brothers were older. As I said, one moved away to New York. Sam got married. So Ben was going to Creighton. Charlie was in and out. Oh, he moved to New York too. But yes, my mother and father and I always sat down. My dad always had, he'd clean up, he'd have the shot, schnapps. And we did sit down to eat. And he would, of course, there was no diversions. There was no television, no radio to speak of. So you sat down and it was dinner. Always a white tablecloth for Shabbos, always. But even when you had meat, there was always a tablecloth for some reason. Oh, otherwise you had an oilcloth on the table. You had the kitchen table. You ate in the kitchen on the oilcloth. Oh, and holidays. Oh my, to get ready for Pesach was something because you had to change the dishes, the pots and pans. I remember the boards. First it was the brown butcher paper, or was it the boards first and the butcher paper on top? And you couldn't touch anything. And God forbid, since I was the one, if I mixed up a fleishika towel from a milchika towel, that's a dairy to a meat towel. You kept separate towels in the kitchen and separate forks and knives and spoons. And God forbid, if you mixed one up, you put the fork and the knife or the spoon outside in the dirt and you buried it for a couple of days. That's to make it kosher. But Passover was really something, with the brown paper and the boards. And you had to bring the dishes up from the basement and take the other dishes down, and you always had 3 sets of dishes, regardless. You had a milchadika, which is meat. You had fleishadika, milchadika, and parva. And the parva were the glass that you could use. And I could remember you served tea. Oh, you served tea in the glass cups and saucers, and always with lump sugar. It's always lump sugar. Always, and those were served in the glass cups. And in fact, my tante, Mrs. Sweeback, was more Orthodox and more religious than my mother. And I remember going over there on Shabbos afternoon, and my tante had 3 tea kettles, a parva, a milchadika, and a fleishadika. And my mother would say, Rivka, Wasser is Wasser. Why do you need separate? She says, at your house, you can keep what you want. In my house, I do what I want. But they argued over those tea kettles. Water is water. You never mix the dishes. God forbid if you mix the dishes, out they went, because I don't think they went in the dirt. But the silverware went in the dirt. Uh, well, you had two sets of dishes for Fleischenecke, that's the meat. One for company and one for every day. The Milchenecke you didn't serve usually. So you didn't use paper plates. You had separate pots and pans. You had separate everything. You had to spend a lot of money for dishes just and pots and pans. And you, as I say, the Milchika towels and the Fleischenecke towels. I think the tablecloths weren't so bad, but the towels were. Um, we sat down. Uh, it was a happy time. You were glad to come home. And there was always milk and cookies when you came home from school. Always homemade cookies. Um, I thought my mother's cakes weren't as good as some of her friends' chocolate cakes, because they were. Today I would give anything for her pitter rolls, as we called them. Uh, but they weren't as good as Anita Winthrop. She made the best pecan rolls there were. She lived a block away. That's Leon Winthrop's mother. And oh, her pecan rolls were out of this world. Mrs. Fox, who lived next door, that was Harry and Marvin Fox. Anna Fox was her name. She made her own bagels and her own donuts. And that was a treat. I mean, her bagels, in the hot oil. But that was separate from her donuts. And they brought in the neighbors, they exchanged recipes, and they brought their goodies over to taste, and you exchanged with them. They were glad to share. And, oh gosh, I remember Mrs. Uh, Rose Blumkin. I remember her coming to the house before she started. She would be selling the Shabbos candles in a basket. I remember her coming with a basket selling Shabbos candles before she started her little store. And God, that's going back. That's really going back. There were, we were all poor, but most of them became successful people. Harry B. Cohn became out of that environment. Sis Adler's, the Hurwitzes, they were down on 20th Street. Mrs. Noddle, Harlan Noddle's mother, the Smiths lived down, was it? Yeah, Miss Smith. They lived on 20th Street between Clark and Grace. Oh my goodness. And there were so many of them. And they all, and even my cousins, the Sweebacks, they said they were so poor, they all became comfortable. And they said it's a miracle that none of them ended up in jail or traps or whatnot. We all came out of good environment, stable environment. It was home. It was the synagogue. It was the Torah, keeping observances. You had to be passionate. You had to give to charity. Oh my goodness, my mother had I don't know how many boxes in the storeroom, as we would call it, from the different guys. Oh, my father called them the Gonoffs, with the charity boxes. There wasn't just Hadassah. There was this one and this one. There was an orange box and this one. She must have had 10 boxes, pushka boxes, And you never turned down a stranger. And it was bad times then too. I can remember the Depression. But if somebody came to your door, you gave them bread, you gave them a sandwich, you gave them a nickel, even if it cost you, but you gave them something. You had to share with others. So we were brought up with giving, helping others, and helping your own. And I can remember when we knew about, unfortunately, the Holocaust, before the world did, because my father had relatives in Russia, my mother had relatives in Poland, and they would write the stories, what was going on. So I remember the uproar when I was going to Central High School in 35, that there was trouble there. We had to give and help. We had to send, oh, sure, with Youth Aliyah, with Hadassah. But we knew there were uprising and it was bad for the Jews, whereas at least we were fortunate in America. And my first trip to Germany, I thought, and when I came across that little train depot, I thought, thank God my parents came over, because otherwise it brought, I was very uncomfortable when I was Germany the first time, because all I thought of was the Holocaust and seeing that train depot, and I was very uncomfortable. But we were taught, and that is, to give, to share. We came from an environment that didn't know of bad things, more or less. Yes, things were going on. When my folks talked in Russian or Polish, which they didn't want me to hear, I knew they were talking about people or gossiping. And the same as I tried in my broken Yiddish in front of my children not to understand. So when they were talking Russian or Polish, which they could do, they were talking about things they didn't want us to hear. And I remember my tante and my mother talking about a certain lady, and she had problems. We got the drift of it. We never did actually know what was what, but it was a real shanda. And, it was just, all I can say is I have marvelous, wonderful memories of my childhood. I didn't miss anything. I have two nice boys that are married, and I have two loving daughter-in-laws and four grandchildren. I love them all. Sarah, being the oldest and the only granddaughter, is more or less the apple of my eye. We are very close. I have some wonderful letters that she wrote me as a little girl when she would get mad at her parents. Booby, I'm going to come stay with you. And Sarah, you're always welcome. Jeffrey, you are the same way. I remember I had to share a room when you were a baby. You heard Booby, but you called me B. B, are you there? B. And Frank's two boys, Daniel and Evan. Thank God. I love you. I hope to see you all get married. I was all at your bar mitzvahs. I have wonderful memories. And Sarah, you're going to be 30. I want you to get married. I want to go to a wedding. I hope, naturally, to a nice Jewish wedding. But whatever, if they're nice and they're presentable and they're decent kids, that's what counts. I really love you. I treasure you. And I will always treasure you. You are my four treasures. So naturally, I have to treasure you. I hope to find nachas and love with you. I hope you will carry on the Jewish tradition. I know with some you may reject it because, Sarah, you come from an intermarried family, but your mother has kept the Jewish tradition. Daniel and Evan, you were adopted. You are the same to me as Sarah and Jeffrey, but also you come from parentage that could be different. But you have been raised Jewish. I hope you will keep, all of you, the Jewish tradition, the faith, and all the values. I love you with all my heart. Booby. Paul, you are my oldest. You will always have a special in my heart as the oldest. I love you. Barry, you were the middle child, but you were always lovable and still are today. Frank, you were my baby, will always be my baby. But I love you all. I'm very proud of all of you. You have turned out to be good mensch. That means a real person. Whether you're rich or poor, you're considerate, you're kind, you're always solicitous, and that's what's important. I love you all. Your mom.